Learn English through story. The longing and the encounter. It was a quiet spring evening when Eleanor Matheson stood at the edge of her garden, gazing at the horizon. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. And yet her heart felt as gray as the clouds that threatened rain earlier that day. Eleanor was in her late 40s, a woman of grace and composure, yet her eyes betrayed a longing that had been festering within her for years. The sprawling estate she called home was beautiful, a testament to the wealth and prestige of the Matheson family. Yet, the grandeur felt hollow. She was married to Charles Matheson, a man revered for his business acumen. Yet his emotional absence had left her yearning for something she couldn't quite define. Their marriage had started with promised shared laughter, stolen kisses under moonlit skies, and whispered dreams of a future together. But time and ambition had eroded their connection. Charles was now a man consumed by his work, leaving little room for Eleanor's quiet needs or desires. She often wondered if he even noticed her anymore, or if she had become just another piece of furniture in their grand home. And so, Eleanor found herself seeking solace in her garden, her hands buried in the soil, her heart aching for an intimacy she could no longer find within the walls of her marriage. One evening, as Eleanor was tending to her roses, a stranger appeared at the garden gate. He was tall and rugged, with an air of mystery that seemed to draw the very air around him. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth but tinged with hesitancy. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was passing by and couldn't help but admire your garden. It's breathtaking." Eleanor looked up, startled, but intrigued. "Thank you," she replied, brushing dirt off her hands. "I don't usually get visitors here." The man introduced himself as Gabriel Hart, a writer traveling through the countryside in search of inspiration. He had been staying at a nearby inn, and had wandered down the lane when the vibrant colors of Eleanor's roses caught his eye. Their conversation began with pleasantries about the garden, but it quickly deepened. Gabriel had a way of speaking that made Eleanor feel seen, as if her thoughts and feelings mattered. He asked about her favorite flowers, her childhood, and the dreams she once had, before life settled into its current monotony. As the sun set and the evening chill settled in, Eleanor found herself reluctant to say goodbye. Gabriel seemed to sense her hesitation and offered a smile. "Perhaps I'll pass by again," he said. Eleanor nodded, her heart fluttering in a way it hadn't in years. "Perhaps you will." Over the weeks that followed, Gabriel became a regular presence in Eleanor's life. He would visit the garden at twilight, their conversations weaving a tapestry of shared stories, laughter, and an unspoken connection that grew stronger with each passing day. Eleanor knew it was dangerous. She was a married woman, and Gabriel was a stranger. Yet, she couldn't deny the way he made her feel alive, understood, desired. For the first time in years, she felt like more than just Mrs. Matheson. She felt like Eleanor again. But with every stolen moment, guilt began to creep into her heart. She loved the way Gabriel looked at her, the way his words seemed to wrap around her like a warm embrace. But she couldn't ignore the vows she had made to Charles. One evening, as they sat on a stone bench beneath the old oak tree, Eleanor finally voiced her fears. "This can't continue," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm married, Gabriel. Whatever this is, it's wrong." Gabriel looked at her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I know," he said softly, "but I also know that you're not happy. You deserve more than the life you're living." His words struck a chord deep within her. She wanted to argue, to defend her marriage, but the truth was undeniable. She wasn't happy, and Gabriel had awakened something in her that she couldn't ignore, a longing for connection, for passion, for a life filled with meaning. One day, as Gabriel stood at the gate, Charles arrived home early from a business trip. The sight of another man speaking to his wife sent a surge of jealousy through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "Who is this?" Charles demanded, his tone cold and authoritative. "This is Gabriel," Eleanor said, her voice calm but firm. "He's a writer staying nearby. He's been admiring the garden." Charles looked at Gabriel with suspicion, but he didn't press the matter further. Instead, he turned to Eleanor and said, "We need to talk." That evening, for the first time in years, Charles and Eleanor had a candid conversation about their marriage. "I've felt you pulling away," Charles admitted, "but I didn't know how to reach you. I thought giving you space was what you needed." Eleanor sighed, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. "I've felt invisible, Charles. Like I'm just a part of the scenery in your life. I've been longing for something more, something real." Charles listened, and for the first time, he saw the pain in Eleanor's eyes. He realized that his obsession with work had blinded him to the woman he had once loved so deeply. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice cracking. "Tell me what I need to do to fix this." Eleanor hesitated, torn between the comfort of her marriage and the allure of what Gabriel represented. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor wrestled with her feelings. She continued to see Gabriel, but their meetings became less frequent. Their conversations tinged with the weight of unspoken truths. Meanwhile, Charles made a genuine effort to reconnect with Eleanor. He took time off work, planned small gestures of affection, and began to listen to her in a way he hadn't before. Slowly but surely, the cracks in their marriage began to heal. Eleanor knew she had a choice to make. Gabriel had awakened something in her, but Charles was her husband, the man she had built a life with. Could she find the passion and connection she craved within the bounds of her marriage? In the end, Eleanor chose to invest in her marriage. She realized that the longing she had felt wasn't just for love or passion. It was for a sense of being truly seen and valued. And while Gabriel had offered her a glimpse of that, it was Charles who held the history and the potential for a shared future. Eleanor and Charles worked together to rebuild their relationship, learning to communicate openly and prioritize each other's needs. Gabriel, understanding Eleanor's decision, left town, his presence in her life a bittersweet memory. The longing and the encounter teaches us that longing and desire often stem from unmet needs within ourselves. It's easy to be drawn to the allure of something new and exciting, but true fulfillment often comes from nurturing the relationships and commitments we've already made. Love isn't about perfection, it's about choosing to grow together, even when the path is difficult. Eleanor's journey is a reminder that sometimes the answers we seek are already within us. We just need the courage to look inward and the patience to heal. After Gabriel's abrupt departure from Eleanor's garden that day, Charles's unexpected jealousy lingered in the air. Though the moment had passed without escalation, it marked a shift. Eleanor noticed that Charles, once dismissive of her solitude, began to take more of an interest in her daily routines. He started coming home earlier, joining her for dinner instead of staying late at the office. He would ask her about her garden, her reading, and her thoughts, questions that once seemed unimportant to him. For a while, Eleanor was cautious. This sudden attention felt more like scrutiny than genuine interest, a response to Gabriel's presence rather than an earnest effort to reconnect. Yet, something inside her softened each time Charles asked, "How was your day?" and waited, with uncharacteristic patience, for her answer. Still, Gabriel's absence was a shadow that followed her. She had grown used to his evening visits, to the way his words made her feel alive and seen. Now, in the quiet of her garden, the silence was deafening. One evening, as Eleanor tended to her roses, her fingers brushing against the soft petals, she found herself thinking about the stories Gabriel had shared with her, his travels, his childhood memories, the novels he dreamed of writing. She realized it wasn't just Gabriel she missed. It was the version of herself she had been in his presence. 2 weeks after Gabriel's departure, Eleanor received a letter. The envelope was plain, but her name was written in a hand she recognized instantly. She hesitated before opening it, her heart racing as she unfolded the single sheet of paper. "Eleanor, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to thank you for the kindness and warmth you showed me during my stay. Our conversations in the garden brought me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. You are a remarkable woman, and your presence has left an indelible mark on me. I understand the path you have chosen, and I respect it deeply. It is not an easy thing to honor one's commitments while also longing for something more. Know that you have a friend in me, even from afar. Take care of your roses, Eleanor, and take care of yourself. Yours, Gabriel. Eleanor read the letter several times, her emotions swirling. There was no request to see her again, no suggestion of rekindling their connection, only a quiet acknowledgement of what they had shared and an unspoken goodbye. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the drawer of her bedside table, unsure why she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Charles's efforts to reconnect with Eleanor were sincere but clumsy at first. He planned dinners at expensive restaurants, thinking that grand gestures might reignite the spark they had lost. But Eleanor, though appreciative, found these outings hollow. It's not about the dinners or the gifts, Charles, she said one evening, her tone gentle but firm. I need to feel like we're partners again, like we see each other. Charles nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. I'm trying, Eleanor. I just don't know how to undo years of neglect. Start small, she said. Let's talk. Really? Talk about more than just work or logistics. Let's find out who we are now, not who we were 20 years ago. They began having evening walks around the estate, a practice they hadn't done since their early years of marriage. At first, their conversations were awkward, filled with silences and tentative questions. But over time, they began to share more. Charles about the pressures of his business, his fears of failure, and his realization that he had let his work define him. Eleanor spoke about her loneliness, her longing for connection, and the dreams she had set aside for the sake of their life together. One night, under a sky full of stars, Charles stopped and took Eleanor's hand. I don't want you to feel invisible, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You are the best thing in my life, Eleanor. I just forgot how to show it. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't look away. I want to believe that, Charles, but it's going to take time. As their relationship slowly healed, Eleanor found herself drawn even more deeply into her garden. It became a metaphor for her marriage. The roses needed pruning, watering, and care. Much like her relationship with Charles, she spent hours tending to the flowers, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing something beautiful. One afternoon, as she was kneeling in the soil, Charles joined her unexpectedly. Teach me, he said, holding out a pair of gardening gloves. Eleanor looked at him in surprise. You want to help? He nodded. I figure it's about time I took an interest in the things that matter to you. They spent the afternoon working side by side, their hands dirty, but their spirits light. Eleanor showed Charles how to trim the roses properly, how to recognize when the soil needed fertilizing, and how to spot the early signs of disease in the leaves. As they worked, Charles said, it's amazing how much care these flowers need. I used to think they just grew on their own. Eleanor smiled. Nothing beautiful grows without care, Charles. The simplicity of her words struck him deeply. He realized then how much he had taken her for granted, assuming that their marriage would thrive without effort, that Eleanor's love for him would always be enough to sustain them. Months passed, and Eleanor and Charles found themselves in a much better place. They weren't perfect, but they were trying, and that effort made all the difference. One afternoon, while walking through town, Eleanor saw a familiar figure in the distance. Gabriel. He was sitting at an outdoor cafe, a notebook open in front of him, his pen moving swiftly across the page. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She considered walking over, saying hello, but something held her back. She realized that while Gabriel had been a significant part of her journey, he was no longer a part of her future. Instead, she watched him from afar for a moment, a soft smile on her lips. She hoped he had found the inspiration he was searching for, just as she had found the connection she had been longing for within her own life. Turning back to Charles, who was waiting for her at a nearby shop, she felt a sense of peace. Her encounter with Gabriel had been a catalyst, but it was her commitment to her marriage and Charles's willingness to change that had ultimately brought her the fulfillment she sought. The longing and the encounter teaches us that while life may present us with temptations and moments of doubt, true strength lies in recognizing the value of what we already have. Love requires effort, vulnerability, and a willingness to grow together, even in the face of hardship. Eleanor's journey reminds us that while external connections may offer a glimpse of something we're missing, the deepest fulfillment often comes from nurturing the relationships we've built and choosing to invest in them. wholeheartedly. As Eleanor and Charles continued to rebuild their marriage, there were moments of unexpected tension. Healing was not linear, and Eleanor found herself occasionally resentful of the years she felt had been stolen from her. One evening, as they were clearing up after dinner, Eleanor voiced a thought that had been brewing in her mind. "Do you ever wonder how we let it get this far?" she asked, her tone softer than her words. Charles paused, placing the dishes on the counter. "I think about it every day," he admitted, "and I hate that I didn't notice how much you were hurting." Eleanor sighed, running her fingers along the edge of the table. "It's not just you, Charles. I stopped trying too. I let the distance grow because it felt safer than risking rejection." Charles walked over to her, his expression serious. "I know I'm partly to blame, Eleanor. I got so caught up in work, in the idea that providing for us was enough, that I forgot what it meant to truly be your partner. But I want to make this right, not because I'm afraid of losing you, but because I love you." Eleanor looked into his eyes, searching for the sincerity she needed to hear. "I love you too," she said finally, her voice trembling. "But love alone isn't enough. We have to fight for this every day." That night, as Eleanor lay awake, she thought about Gabriel's letter. His words echoed in her mind, reminding her of the woman she had rediscovered during their time together. She didn't regret choosing Charles, but she wondered if she could hold on to the parts of herself that Gabriel had awakened: the passion, the creativity, the sense of being truly alive. Eleanor decided to take up painting again. It was a hobby she had loved in her youth, but over the years, it had been pushed aside by the demands of life and the expectations of being a perfect wife. Charles encouraged her, even setting up a small studio in one of the unused rooms of their estate. "I want you to have a space that's yours," he said as he helped her unpack canvases and paints. Eleanor was touched by the gesture, and she found herself spending hours in the studio, lost in the colors and textures of her work. Painting became a form of therapy, a way to process the emotions she had been holding inside for so long. One day, as she worked on a landscape inspired by her garden, Charles walked in with a cup of tea. "May I see?" he asked, his voice tentative. Eleanor hesitated. Her art felt deeply personal, a reflection of her innermost thoughts. But she nodded, stepping aside to let him view the canvas. Charles studied the painting for a long moment. "It's beautiful," he said finally, "just like the garden. But there's something more. It feels alive." Eleanor smiled, a sense of pride swelling within her. "It's how I see it," she said. "Not just the flowers, but the way the garden makes me feel peaceful, free." Charles reached out and took her hand. "I'm glad you've found this again. I know I've taken a lot from you over the years, Eleanor, but I want to give back in any way I can." Despite the progress she and Charles were making, Eleanor couldn't completely erase Gabriel from her mind. He had been a catalyst for change in her life, and she felt a lingering gratitude toward him. One evening, as she was sorting through old letters and keepsakes, she came across Gabriel's note again. She read it slowly, her heart aching with a mixture of nostalgia and acceptance. But Eleanor also understood that holding on to the past would only hinder her growth. With a deep breath, she folded the letter and placed it in a box labeled Memories. It was time to let go. Eleanor and Charles's relationship took another step forward when they decided to collaborate on a project together, transforming an overgrown corner of the estate into a community garden. "It's something we can do together," Eleanor suggested one evening, "and it's a way to give back. I think it would be good for both of us." Charles agreed, and they spent weeks planning the garden, enlisting the help of local volunteers to clear the land and plant the first crops. As they worked side by side, Eleanor saw a new side of Charles, one that was patient, kind, and deeply invested in their shared vision. She began to appreciate the man he had become, rather than mourning the man he used to be. The community garden became a place of connection, not just for them, but for the entire town. Eleanor often found herself surrounded by laughter and conversation as neighbors gathered to tend to the plants. One afternoon, as she watched a group of children planting flowers, Charles came up beside her and slipped his arm around her waist. "This was a good idea," he said, his voice warm. Eleanor leaned into him, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. "It was our idea," she corrected. Months later, Eleanor and Charles attended a gallery opening in the city. Eleanor had submitted one of her paintings to the exhibition on a whim, and to her surprise, it had been selected for display. As they walked through the gallery, admiring the artwork, Eleanor felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. She had rediscovered herself not just as a wife, but as a woman with passions, talents, and dreams. At the end of the evening, as they prepared to leave, Eleanor spotted a familiar figure in the crowd, Gabriel. He was standing near the exit, speaking with another guest. When his eyes met Eleanor's, he smiled a quiet, knowing smile. Eleanor nodded in acknowledgement, her heart steady. She felt no urge to approach him, no lingering ache of unfinished business. She had found what she was searching for, and it wasn't tied to Gabriel or anyone else. It was within herself and the life she had chosen to build with Charles. As she and Charles stepped out into the cool night air, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. The longing that had once consumed her was gone, replaced by a deep appreciation for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The longing and the encounter reminds us that life's challenges often come from within, driven by our unmet needs and desires. While it's tempting to seek fulfillment in external sources, true happiness lies in nurturing what we already have and rediscovering ourselves in the process. Eleanor's story teaches us that love, though imperfect, is a choice, a commitment to grow, to forgive, and to create something beautiful from the pieces we hold dear. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoy, then please like and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel.